sustainable fashion. A panel discussion cannot get any better with Her Royal Highness from Baroda, the turban thinker from United Kingdom, the owner of one of the prestigious sari brand from South India, to a lady who has created a niche for herself in the field of design from Mumbai. To top it all, we are also honored to have a moderator from UK who followed her dreams and is a name to reckon with in the music industry. Flow was initiated over 3 decades ago, and one of the topics that has been our focus, besides women entrepreneurship and empowerment, has been to look at ways of preserving the planet. We've had discussions with environmentalists, corporates, colleges, and more importantly, with designers. Our goals for the year is around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Whether it is in food or fashion, more and more people are choosing to only opt for brands that are ethical in their relationship with the resources they use. Pandemic or not, a change has been long coming, and though the process might be slow, it is a step in the right direction. I personally think that we are spoiled by fast fashion and the prices that go with it. Comparing that with its unethical prices with a sustainable produce that could be priced right isn't quite the same. It's almost like comparing a McDonald's burger with a gourmet vegan burger from a restaurant. It's tempting to buy fast fashion, but it is certainly at the cost of someone else's life. In fact, I have only 5 saris in my wardrobe, and Lavanya, as a true South Indian, I have one Nalli brand too. And to quote my mom, you don't own a Nalli sari, but you preserve it for the next generation. Looking forward to a fabulous session with the experts in the panel, as their role has always been to make a difference and create a social impact. I would now like to request Rinku Mecheri, the chairperson of Chennai, to say a few words, followed by Lubena Shapurwala, the senior vice chair, Mumbai, to introduce the panel. Thank you. Over to you, Rinku.
Thank you, Malu. And good evening, everybody. It's indeed an honor to be here amongst all of you. On behalf of Flow Chennai, it's so good to see faces from across, the chapters, and also be part of a Mumbai chapter event. I think the important thing here is that we're collaborating for a topic which is very close to our heart and very close to our culture as well. And it's indeed a privilege to be here with 2 ladies who are scions of, leaders in the traditional sari industry. We have, of course, Lavanya, who's the youngster who's leading the way and has recently made forays into UK with the brand Nalli, and our senior vice chair, Jayashree, who herself has a niche brand called Palam Silks. So here's to a great evening ahead, and thank you all over here. Over to you, Lubina.
Thank you. Thank you. It is my absolute honor to be introducing our guest today. Her Royal Highness Radhika Raje Gaikwad is born into the princely family of Vankaner, Gujarat. Radhika Rajaji has always been a keen student of heritage and culture. Presently, she is actively involved in running family trusts, is the director of CDS Art Foundation, Ahmedabad, where she works in aligning artisans and designers and bridging the gap with the end consumer. Through the COVID-19 pandemic, Her Highness has been able to reach out and aid over 600 artisanal families in Orissa. Asil's rich and diverse background in business has enabled her to have a unique understanding of both the creative and commercial elements of a business. For the past decade, Asil has held a number of firsts, placing her as the first female CEO for 3 of the Middle East's leading groups. Most recently, as the CEO for Damas Jewelry, their first female CEO in over 100 years. Asil strongly believes that ethical and social responsibility should be at the forefront of any business. Next, to introduce Lavanya. Lavanya is vice chairperson at the Nalli Silk Saris, which is a reputed brand in India. She is an MBA graduate from Harvard Business School. The Economic Times has named her as one of India's fastest rising women leaders. She has also been named by Forbes as Asia's Women to Watch. Divya Thakur is the founder of Design Temple, a luxury home accessory brand. She has recently founded a digital museum called Museum of Design Excellence. Divya's approach to life and work is rooted in the spiritual and cultural ethos of India. Our moderator for the session today is Silvia Coleman. Silvia has had a successful career in international music business at both Sony Music and EMI Music, and has worked with artists from George Michael to Michael Jackson. Last year, she co-founded BP Pure Sounds, working with brand new talent to develop and uplift them to major platforms, from record labels to broadcasters to brands. Silvia is a strong advocate for business, having a social conscience, and has worked as a part of CSR for Swarovski, and has had board roles with various charities. I take this opportunity to hand over the panel to you, Silvia.
You need to unmute yourself.
There we are. Thank you very much, Nabina. Thank you, Malu. I am very excited to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. This is an exceptional panel of ladies, and I'm looking forward to learning a great deal about conscious fashion. I'm conscious that we are going to be so engaged in conversation that I might run over time. So maybe, Nabina, I could ask you to very kindly maybe alert me 10 minutes before the end of the panel discussion, just so that we keep to our schedule. So conscious fashion, it means so much to everybody. Everybody has different interpretations of it. What I would love to do to start is to understand from each of the panel members what conscious fashion actually means to you personally, why you're here today, why this is such an important topic to each of you. Let's start with Your Royal Highness. Can you tell us a little bit about why it motivates you, why you're here today, and what it means to you?
Hi, Silvia. Thank you for your question. Hello to everyone tuned in. I'm very excited to be in this august company. So thank you for your first question, Silvia. For me, honestly, I don't have to really give it much of a thought, because when we look at our legacy, we look at our history, our culture, everything was conscious fashion. Things were made very deliberately, slowly, keeping the dignity of the artisan and the craftsman, as well as the resources in mind. Dyeing would take place when there would be surplus water. The crops were planned in a way. The crops would be, the catering to the garments were made according to what the output of your cotton or silk was. So it was all done keeping very deliberate, measures were taken for the environment, for the dignity of the artisans. There was none of this rush or this requirement that I must have, multiple outfits in my wardrobe. Yes, people did have, but they were built over years and generations. It wasn't that you just, now what you see, I need to build a trousseau for my daughter, I must have 50 garments and I must pick them up within 6 months. That's not how it worked. I know for my own wedding, my mother started collecting saris for my wedding from a very young age. If I liked a particular sari that she may have worn or bought, she would keep it aside for me. So this is how, it was consciously created. A legacy of wardrobe was created, and families took care of the, patronized certain weavers, certain artisans, dyers. It was a big unit of a village, really, a tribe of artisans working together for the temple or the royal family, and with great dignity, which I feel has unfortunately vanished, and we need to recreate that.
So do you think it's actually the responsibility of the consumer as well as the retailer to think about conscious fashion and to think about what they're buying?
Absolutely, because to a large extent, it's what we put out there and make it look coveted. Of course, we have film stars wearing clothes, and the consumer wants what is being looked desirable or made to look desirable. Unfortunately, the artisan or the craftsman is sitting so far away in his village he is disconnected with what is being worn at the red carpet, so to speak. So, you know, a bridge like has to be created. And that's where people like we come in, you know, who are conscious of and are able to balance that and connect the consumer with what is being created. And the creator gets to know what the consumer wants. At this moment, they are not really aware what the trends are. They don't know what color is in or not in. They're making what they've always made. But it's about time, I think, that whatever has been created for generations and centuries has endured and is classic, and we need to make it in always, you know, not as per a season. So
well, that's
yes,
going to be
a very, very conscious role we should be all playing.
That's going to be a very interesting theme, and it'll be interesting to also see what the retailers on the panel actually feel about that responsibility. Asil, let me turn to you. Why are you here? Why is this an important subject to you, and what does it mean to you?
Well, first of all, thank you for everybody to be here today. And thank you, Malu and Lubina, for hosting all of us. It's fantastic and a subject very close to my heart. And I need to start by saying, as a matter of fact, you know, responsibility or social responsibility is something that I was brought up and raised by. My father, may he rest in peace, was a pioneer for solar energy in the 70s and one of the 3 men in the world that actually represented and ambassaded the power of nature and educated. So as children, we grew up watching him do talks, travel the world, educating mindsets many, many years ago. So for me, sustainability is very much, it's a mindset. It's inherent to who I am. I look at it not just from one single dimension, which is fashion, even though I'm in that business. I look at it as an overall innate respect for humanity, you know, for nature, for the environment that we are in, for the world. And when you look at it from that 360 mindset, it's only through that perspective that you can truly advocate and champion and implement sustainability. So for me, why I'm here today is because ever since I was a year old and could understand and learn how to speak and talk, I was very much involved in that world. And unfortunately, especially in the business of fashion, being part Indian and from the Middle East as well, absolutely, it is part of our culture to be sustainable. And we talk about generations and we inherit and we save and everything is precious to us. And then I've been in the business of fashion and luxury and retail for 30 years and seeing the complete opposite, and what the world is in today is really dire. So for me, I've been championing this for as long as I can possibly remember. And it's been a very frustrating journey because it's not evolved the way that I would like it to see. And the great news is today we're sitting in a space where it is to the table, it's at the forefront. But like you said, Silvia, it's a very, very long way off. But at least it's sort of, you know, baby steps towards something that myself and of course everyone here today is very passionate about.
Thank you, Asil. That's a fascinating story, amazing history. Thank you for sharing that. Divya, what drives you?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me on this exciting panel. As I was introduced, I'm a lifestyle designer and I work with various global brands to create things, but principally I try and create globally chic, contemporary, relevant, sustainable products inspired by India. So the idea of conscious creation really, to me, is total awareness. If you take the idea of consciousness and you take awareness, and when you create, then in every step of creation, be it ideation, when you first start thinking, you question whether there is a need to create a product. So right from the ideation to the actual designing of it, to sourcing, is it correctly sourced? Is it correctly produced? Is there any kind of exploitation taking place in the production part? How do you distribute it? Where do you sell it? And even when you complete, you know, when you think you've completed the life cycle of the product, what happens then? Is there potential for reuse? Is there a potential to renew it? And finally, what happens with disposal. So I think that basically, to me, consciousness or conscious creation is total awareness, a 360-degree awareness of how the product is going to live its life out, like every aspect of it. And I think that's something that I'd be very interested in exploring in this talk today, but really trying to, maybe find a way to integrate it into our way of being and thinking and creating and doing business.
That's very interesting, Divya, and I'm sure we're going to touch on many aspects of this during this conversation today, because it is really looking at the entirety of the supply chain, and we're going to come on to some of the conversations that are happening at the moment around shareholder and investor value in companies as well. Lavanya, what does this mean to you, and what drove you to be here today? I think, Lavanya, you just need to unmute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Lavanya.
So thank you for having me. So I think I keep it short because some of the concepts have been spoken about earlier as well. But broadly, it's the word that you use. You said supply chain, and I use the same phrase, but I call it the value chain, because everybody adds value in the chain. Right from the person who designs it, manufactures it, produces it, distributes it, ultimately to the end consumer. And I think conscious fashion is something that, as a phrase, has probably come into vogue now, almost because most fashion is not conscious fashion. Probably 20, 30 years ago, such a phrase wouldn't have needed to exist, because most fashion really wasn't built with anything else in mind. And what I mean by that is, to me, it's three things. The reduction of waste, because I think today fast fashion specifically adds a lot of waste, and a lot of byproduct is produced that can't actually be composted, or it doesn't go back into the earth. Those levels of waste are quite high now than they were historically. So if you just compare the level of waste that's created through the entire value chain. The other part of it is also in terms of just equal value through the value chain. I think when the chains were smaller and it was less complicated, most businesses around the world were mom and pop stores. It wasn't as consolidated with a few large global corporations. I think there was an equal value. The value that was created was equally shared. And now, as things have become a little more lopsided and a bit more complicated, I think that the folks who are indispensable to the value chain end up, absorbing most of the value that is created. And so that's that's not, in my view, a very sustainable business model for everyone who genuinely has, some value-adding activity in the chain, right from the designer to the artisan, all the way till the end. And then the final thing, which I suppose sits within that concept of conscious fashion, is the notion of sustainable consumption. And what I mean by that is, if you look at Nalli sarees or Palam and most saree brands, actually, they're built to last. They're almost built to be heirloom pieces. And the idea is that you build it around the concept of, high quality, good timeless design, and something that the end consumer can treasure and hold on to. Whereas if you look at the shift over the last few years into where we are today, it's become more around the cycle of consumption. You build something so that people can wear it, and then it lasts for a few washes, and then it sort of goes to a landfill. And so that, I feel, is like an unsustainable method of consumption, because it goes back to that concept of, you add waste. It's not really sustainable. You find yourself on this treadmill of having to refresh your wardrobe every few months. But this is a very new state of the world, and I don't think it's always been that way. So in a sense, conscious fashion is probably just going back to what it used to be.
How do we change the consumer's viewpoint, Lavanya? Because this is such an important point as to whose responsibility it is, and whether it's a shared responsibility support conscious fashion? Is it the consumer? Is it the retailer? Is it both? How do we change the consumer's viewpoint?
I think some portion of that has already happened. Like I said, while on the one hand, we might not have had this conversation 30 years ago because most fashion was sustainable, sustainably developed fashion. Despite the situation being what it is, we're still having this conversation to say, what does it mean to have conscious fashion? So there is a certain movement that's happening, a certain self-awareness. The first step of what you're asking, I think, would come from more visibility. There's a whole slew of companies that have cropped up, which provide much more visibility into their entire processes to say, where the manufacturing happens, how much of the value is created at each part of the chain, and how much of that goes back to the people who actually do manufacture those products or design those products. And I think that's come from a consumer push. As consumers and people like us who are the ultimate wearers of this, seek to know more about the origin of our products and all of the hands that have touched it along the way. That pressure, I think, creates a need for anybody who's developing these products, whether corporates or smaller stores, to create some part of, some visibility. And I think it stems from awareness and then more visibility. And then automatically, I think some of those, some of the other parts of that equation will probably fall in place.
Extremely interesting. Thank you, Lavanya. Great reasons for everybody to be here today. Thank you. And I want to go back and just pick up, Your Highness, on something that you commented on surrounding India's heritage and tradition. And I'm very aware that from reading about you that you took a master's in Indian history. This is something you're very passionate about, very committed to. You've worked a lot in terms of preserving India's heritage and tradition. Do you feel that India really takes advantage of that history? And how could it do more to actually bring even greater awareness of it?
Actually, Silvia, I do feel we take advantage of it. If you look at the global exports of handicrafts, we are almost 95%. So India does dominate even today, all handmade products sold worldwide. So I think we are well connected to our root, which is handmade. All things are handmade. I mean, from tools to your jewelry, everything that system still exists in India, and it's still at such a nominal price. Abroad, the kind of premium you pay for something handmade. In India, it is, unless it is mentioned, it is more or less by default handmade. So yes, I do feel that we are still connected. There is potential. India has gone through really tough times. We have not been in the most prosperous country for many years now. But our culture and our craftsmanship has continued. So it is very, very resilient. And we've seen it even in this pandemic. It is the artisans and the crafts have been badly hit. But I have also seen this great urge that the locals, the citizens, in addition to the government, who have volunteered and wanted to help out in their small way. And that's how my sister and I were able to reach out to 600 families in Orissa. It was because of just volunteers, people coming up with money and wanting to help out. So I do believe that there is that connection that we as Indians have to our craft, because we've grown up seeing it even, very, very subconsciously. But yes, more needs to be done, and that perhaps would depend a little bit more on the marketing and the design element. Because if we are able to redesign or readapt perhaps the usage, not the technique of the craft, because that would be corrupting. The crafts are already so evolved and sophisticated, but perhaps give it a more adaptable usage. Because everyone is now living in smaller homes, the family sizes are smaller, they need something which is utilitarian perhaps. So to bring in that aspect and marketing, now we are so driven by marketing that if these two elements come in, I think we would be able to do a lot more for our craft sector.
I'm sure that's it's fascinating, and I'm sure that Divya, you would have some thoughts on this, because I read a very interesting quote about you, Divya, in the New York Times. I just want to read this out, about you valiantly resisting the global whitewashing of India's cultural identity. And of course, you've curated many exhibitions around the world celebrating Indian design. How do you think that you can use your cultural capital to actually create conscious consumption?
So, I mean, just to begin, we are an ancient civilization, and we're talking over 5,000 years of inspiration and inspiring textile, culture, heritage, all of that. So it's not an easy hat to wear, and it comes with a lot of responsibility, and it comes at a time where everybody, not just in the world, but even within India, we tend to think that the West or the present is what is modern is the present. Whereas I think the beauty of Indian heritage or culture is that you can actually go back into it, to ancient techniques, to time-tested techniques, to craftspeople, to our own approach to craft, which did not make the distinction between high art and low art. This is a European concept. It did not exist in India, in ancient India. We celebrated a craftsman and a designer equally. It was not that a designer is higher because they come in and sort of, give instructions and the craftsman's making it. It was all equal. So I feel that for me and for a lot of the work I do, I look towards our past to really create the present. And I feel like that's like a really valuable way. But having said that, taking off from what Radhika Raje suggested and what I personally feel also is that we have a massive gift. This country is, we're so lucky to be Indian. So we have to be really proud of that. And we have to find a way to really take the things that are really good about us, our past, our skill sets, and create things that are absolutely relevant for the moment. It shouldn't just be an oddity or a quaintness. It should be something that actually can stand at par with anything else in the world. Monetarily also, conceptually also, and in terms of implementation, design, execution, all of it. And I don't see why that is not possible. I think it's absolutely possible for us to do. We just need to wake up to it and integrate the two things, past and globalization, both. And responsibility is the underlying, of course, of everything that we do. And it's also an ancient Indian tenet. So yeah, I would say that could be a nice way forward.
Do you think, Divya, that India recognizes how much the West looks to India for inspiration?
No, I don't think so. I think that if we did fully, we would carry a little more of that chip on our shoulder. But I don't think we do enough. I think we really need, the world does look to India, not only for wellness, but spiritual well-being. I mean, this is a time in the pandemic where everybody is going inward. I mean, we are a very, very ancient, wise, meaningful, mindful consumption, conscious consumption. All of these are tenets of ancient Indian living. And we really, I don't think that we value that enough in ourselves. And so to kind of really see somebody else valuing it in us, I don't think that's happening adequately.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, we really, really do value you. Speaking as somebody from the West.
Thank you.
That's why it's such an absolute privilege to be here today. It truly is. Just picking up on some of the other points that have been made and going back to the artisans, as somebody who comes from the music business, a completely different industry, and who's worked with big artists, but is now running a startup venture, developing artists. Obviously, one of my challenges is how I actually bring the small artist to the attention of the big corporation, the big brand. How do I plot that journey? Your Highness, you talked a lot about artisans and supporting them. I'd be very interested to know, and maybe I should address this to you, Lavanya, because I know that you have actually worked in a venture where you brought artisan craft to the attention of global corporations and nurtured it. How did you do that? How did you create that journey?
Okay, so I can talk a little bit from experience, and then I also want to take a more controversial approach to the question. But I'll have to take a step back and maybe give some context about how our family business is oriented. So Nalli, our family business is about 90 years old, a little over 92 now. And it's been 100% family owned and family held. So we don't have any external investors. We're not a publicly traded company. Because of that, I recognize that that we're in a more privileged position where we can take choices that stem from our family values, and we can afford to, stick true to certain values, even if it is, how do I say, it's sort of profit negative, but it's maybe people positive, right, or value positive, and that's not a privilege that most organizations have, just because of the way that the metrics are oriented and the quarterly cycle and so on. But having said that, despite the culture and everything, we have grown over the years to have the kind of footprint and the sort of position in the retail industry as we do today. How we keep this alive is really through a very strong sort of culture, and then that automatically moves into very tactical sort of behaviors and training programs for everybody in the field of merchandising for our stores. So the culture and the mindset is really that the sari industry in India is heavily fragmented. It's still somewhat of a cottage industry. There isn't a major consolidation from the supply end. And so it's a little bit of, there's constantly sort of like new innovations happening. Certain artisans sort of find a skill and they find a unique sort of style and a design, and they crop up. And those of us who do, and still a lot of the family members are involved in the hardcore merchandising, we almost have an eye for new talent and for burgeoning new talent. And the approach that we take is we always pilot something new. If it's new, automatically that means it's not been tested before, and so it's a little risky. And that's the place where, from a corporate standpoint, what we balance out and what we can afford to do with saris, because most of these handloom products, they don't require a lot of setup and they don't require for you to procure them in depth. We can afford to actually pick up a few pieces, pilot them in our stores and see how they do. And we always earmark some portion of our assortment to constantly keep being on the lookout for something that's new and something that's innovative. Apart from that, we have parts of our own company that's vertically integrated, specifically in Kanjivarams, where we work with designers and we work directly with the artisans, and we come up with something new and innovative. And I think that's also there's some kinds of innovations and some kinds of experimentations which are quite risky, that if you're a smaller scale creative artisan, you may not have the capital to take that kind of a risk. But these are the places where corporations can actually step in, and they can actually bridge the gap and say, look, we can take the hit if it does end up being a hit. And most of the times what I find is like the larger you get and the more sort of publicly oriented your metrics are, the more risk averse the organization becomes. And so it's almost like a fear of failure as opposed to looking at it as an opportunity cost. Luckily, because we've been a family business and continue to be so despite our size, we take that risk, because some things work, some things don't work, but it's all feedback that we take back to our to the weaving community and the artisans. And I think that feedback sort of really helps them to improve as well. The controversial part of it, and I'll just leave it there and I'll sort of stop, is the big corporation even relevant today? And is it going to be relevant in 5 years? And the reason why I ask this is the landscape of women shopping has fundamentally changed. A lot of women that I know today, they go for inspiration on Instagram and social media. They're sort of, the attitude that women have, and I'm making sort of generalizations here, but the attitude that most women have towards shopping is almost like the thrill of the hunt. You want to find that one perfect item that fits you, suits you, looks good on you, is the right price, is the right everything. And I think that has shifted from, the thrill of the hunt in shopping spaces and retail spaces to online and on Instagram and on Pinterest. And in that world, when technology has disrupted the typical sort of distribution channel, which required a certain amount of capital, real estate investment, and so on, anybody who's a creative entrepreneur with a little enterprise now, theoretically, can set up an Instagram store and can create and sort of be picked up and maybe go viral or just be talked about and spread through word of mouth and be exposed to the end consumer directly. So I think that question of what is the role of the big corporation? If we continue down this path and this risk-averse mindset, do big corporations become less and less relevant? And is that compounded by the sort of technological momentum that we're seeing? I think those are all sort of open questions that I just wanted to put out there. And I think it's going to be quite interesting for the sustainable fashion piece.
And it's of course fascinating, and it's something that we're seeing reflected in many businesses, including my own, where artists can actually go directly to their fan base. And do they? And
it empowers them.
Yes. Do they need to be with a major record label anymore? Asil, you have a huge history with major corporations. Let's just continue that conversation a little bit further. What do you feel are some of the challenges facing major corporations who are trying to, balance the books between conscious fashion and actually, ensuring they have a healthy P&L account? What do you think are some of the challenges facing them, and how should they address them?
I think you said it there. It's having a healthy P&L means that it's almost impossible to have that conscious mindset. And that is one of the biggest issues that we face with global brands. I mean, when you think about it, Silvia, that, the fashion industry on a global is around $1 trillion. And every single brand out there. And it's wonderful to hear the conversations. It's very optimistic. Of course, I work with a lot of emerging designers and young designers, and we try to coach and mentor them and sort of potentialize their abilities. But unfortunately, the reality is that this world is run by corporate giants. There's a handful that you count, and you have to look at it from a global perspective. And that perspective is what overrides and what is the main reason why it doesn't allow socially responsible brands to shine, because it is all about stakeholder value. It is all about the P&L. It's all about the margins. It's all about greed. And therein lies the problem. There is a lack of transparency. You might find hundreds of small brands being transparent, and I certainly deal with so many of them that are talking about the cycle. I actually posted on my show yesterday one of the many designers that I encourage, Seed to Stitch and 1111 Clothing, an amazing brand that does sustainability. But these are small brands. They're turning over tens of thousands of dollars. It is the big corporate groups that own $10 billion, $20 billion. These are the ones that need to make a difference. And when you're not transparent and when you're not telling the reality, and the biggest fear, and I'm going to just give you a little bit of statistics, a little bit of numbers here to just explain to you how, yes, there's a lot of greenwashing as well. I think what's great is this pandemic has allowed people to voice their opinion, and we read more about it. But also, unfortunately, when it comes to corporate brands, they ride on the back of that and they end up talking big statements, which they're not actually living or acting. And if we just put it in context, I mean, every year in the US alone, 3.5 billion pounds of returned goods goes to landfill. I mean, this is an extortionate number. About 1 million packages are returned because of online, right? So if you're shopping, and what's the really big concern is today, the pandemic has forced all of these businesses to go online. Everybody's talking about online. The problem is, over the last 15 years or 10 years, online has taught us that you can buy 1 or 2 or 3 sizes and return it. It doesn't tell us that when you do that, when you're buying size small M and L, to figure it out, returns go to landfill. They don't go back on the shop floor. They're not going to be dry cleaned and pressed and put out there. It's actually cheaper for them to send it to landfill. Nobody talks about the 13 tons of CO2 that's produced just from the transportation of that to landfill. So I guarantee you, if these big brands were not focusing on their P&L, and before you went to shop to buy, you got a little flag saying, by the way, if you want to purchase 3 sizes just to try it on because of your convenience and return it, this is going to cause this. If you're going to shop this and then throw it at the bottom of your wardrobe because you forgot you had a similar piece, it's costing this. The transparency of creating this entire chain means that this person's life is this, that your item for $150 or $500 is in fact costs us $2. So when we talk about transparency, these are the crucial hard facts that need to be out there. So the challenges is that they're not out there. If you happen to be a socially responsible individual with a mindset, then you're going to be searching for these articles. You're going to be following the people on social media that have social responsibility and ethical responsibility. But the mass consumer isn't like that, because they're not educated about it. They're not told about it. So there's a huge disparity between the reality or the optimism that, yes, social responsibility is taking a turn, but the reality is it's governed by mega brands, and they own branding, they own advertising, they own all of the key messaging that you see. And they recognize that if they actually shared with you these statistics, absolutely you will not be purchasing that additional 1 blouse or 10 blouses that look exactly the same as you had. So mass consumerism or luxury, it's equal. It's the lack of transparency in that, coupled with the fact that there are no strict government policies or incentive schemes to incentivize brands or manufacturers to be transparent. So we have a very long way to go, Silvia, in terms of, yes, of course, there's baby steps. And yes, of course, people like myself and everyone on the panel today and hundreds of others out there talk about environment sustainability. But the reality is when, it's governed by 5 or 6 global giants who own the communication messaging, that it makes it very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. So that is the challenge, is that there's lack of transparency. Consumers, we should stop calling them consumers, because by default, when you call a consumer, that means he's consuming. 30 years ago or 20 years ago, they were loyalists, brand advocates, ambassadors. When you start referring to, reports come out and, big groups constantly giving you the data on trends, and they refer to them consumer, mass consumption. That's constantly what's out there. So the other challenge is that, that it's never heard that voice strong enough, Silvia. That's the thing. It's never heard powerful enough. So it takes these big groups to genuinely walk the talk, not just splash a communication campaign, call it social and conscious clothing. But when you actually look at it, it's not at all. And they shouldn't be quoting percentages that are not realistic, because if you look at their value chain or their logistics or supply chain, or that seed to stitch, you'll very quickly realize it's not. It's a lot of it is marketing. And that's the biggest challenge, because how can the little guys compete with the big folks? So yes, it's all about P&L, unfortunately. And like I said, I've been in this business for 30 years, and you can imagine the frustration when you're constantly, in a boardroom or looking at a P&L and trying to champion sustainability. And then you're looking at the numbers, like I said, with the returns and landfills. And that's the big danger. Everybody's celebrating online. Online is the hero. But online actually is going to be a disaster for the economy if they don't educate people to stop returning, because it's all about convenience. It's all about IP. these businesses are not valued on their P&L. They are non-profitable, but they are worth billions because their valuing on online businesses is very, very different. So of course, they're going to encourage you to buy and return at your leisure, or take these 3 outfits and we're going to pay the postage. Don't worry about it. Stick it in an envelope, but they don't share with you the consequence. So it's, you know, we have to go back to that mentality also of sort of merging that bricks and mortar with online. The beauty about countries like India or the Middle East is you still have traditional markets. You still have environments where you can go and physically try things on and make decisions. And so, you know, it's a huge conversation, but government policy has a lot to do with it, a lot to do with this change as well.
Well, let's talk about that, Sil, a little bit further. And let's also, I'd just like to pick up on a word that you used repeatedly there about education.
Yeah.
Lavanya, you obviously graduated from Harvard in business studies. You've worked at McKinsey's in Chicago. You've worked, you know, advising Fortune 500 companies. Do you think that the business schools today are actually training our future leaders in the best possible way? Do you think that their definition of success is actually what we want to see reflected in our business leaders of tomorrow?
So I think it is shifting. I'll give you some context. So I was the last batch, the class of 2011, that was on the older Harvard business, you know, like pure case study driven methodology. And I think up till that point, and this was much more in the 80s and the 90s, if you asked any graduate from business school or anybody who is like newly into corporate, or even, you know, like in the mid-career, what was the purpose of companies? And they would simply say to maximize shareholder value, like to the point where you internalized it so much and you believed in it, that I have one purpose in my professional career, and that is to maximize shareholder value. Now, if you take that statement and you say exactly what does that mean, you can distill it down and you can reduce it to a sales point, just to profits. And so if you just distill it down to profits, what you're saying is everything else is a distant second, third, fourth, or not even on the same league, as long as I'm maximizing shareholder value. I've got capital and I've got to make sure that that capital generates returns, which means that every year my profits grow higher, which means that every year I squeeze more efficiency out of the system. Other aspects like waste, what is the production of waste? What is the level of, not just the level of waste, but sort of unnecessary byproduct, pollutants and so on, they don't factor into it because those considerations don't actually maximize shareholder value. The only thing that maximizes shareholder value is, your share price, which is just directly linked to growing profits and growing efficiencies. That concept has changed. If you were to go back to the business schools right now, one, to see the kind of education that they're getting, right? And two, to ask them, what is the purpose of business today? I think the conversations that we're having today are much more diverse. And even if you look at most people who come out from the top business schools, and I'll just take Harvard as an example, as my alma mater, most of the folks who used to graduate in, I say, the early 2000s or maybe even the 90s, went directly into large corporates. So large sort of corporates into general management roles, the banking and the financial industries, and maybe like management consulting. And now if you see, there's a lot more people who are going into startups, either in the VC world or into startups of their own, and they're sort of starting from the ground. And it's some part of passion, purpose, wanting to reinvent. So I think that shift has started to happen in the larger business schools, but I think it's more a conversational tone. It's a sense that I'm getting. I don't know necessarily that most business schools or most graduates from business schools have a very clear answer to the question, like, what is the purpose of business today? But I think there's there's something interesting and optimistic about the fact that, sometimes the answer that you hear could be, I don't know, and we're sort of figuring it out. And I think that's a far better answer than saying, well, the purpose of business really first, second, and third is to maximize shareholder value.
And obviously there is, this whole conversation going on now as well about, companies owing, a duty to everybody involved in the process, from the shareholder to the I won't use the word consumer seal, to the ambassador, the brand ambassador, through to everybody in the supply chain, employees and so forth. So that whole idea of stakeholder value has become so critical now. Your Highness, why now? Why are we suddenly all focused on this issue? What is it about today that we feel this movement actually really beginning to take force?
I think in this time of pandemic, we've all realized that there is need for so little. And what is really, I think we've been able to revisit our family values. We've been able to revisit our family albums. And we see that, I mean, this is what I can say for my own case, that, you see what your family was wearing or doing a generation or so ago, and it's so beautiful, and you want to reconnect to that. Also, children have had more time with their family, with grandparents, and so on and so forth, and to learn more about how customs were and how things were used, how things were worn, how things were created. I think maybe it is a romantic view that I have, but I am seeing that in my family as well, where my children are connecting more. They're happy to pull out old clothing of ours. We're always recycling. Families like ours are always recycling textiles which were worn, were then shred maybe and used for wrapping or as covers for other textiles, or then maybe for mopping or cleaning. But so children are now at home more to see the progress of how things are repurposed. So there is, I have seen with my own children, they are not wanting clothes. Perhaps the requirement is also less, but there is a slowing down that has come, that you have really been able to manage and you don't require much. And perhaps you may be able to find it in your own cupboard or in your own drawer. And if not, then you look at sourcing it consciously. I think that has that from within. We all are basically good people, and we want to be there to be able to connect with each other. I think we've been able to connect in a way that today I know that someone wants an outfit which perhaps a weaver has woven in a village who's not in a great condition, and it's a dual happiness that you're giving him an income and a sense of dignity for what he's created, and he's creating something bespoke for you. I think we have been able to realize that whatever is created in India by hand is not only handmade, but is also bespoke. And, fashion brands are now talking about it worldwide, but that's what India has always been. The only thing is we need to bring back the dignity of the artisans. The hands who create are somewhere hidden behind a label. We need to bring those hands in the fore. And this has been a time where one must realize, Silvia, that, artisanal work could continue in the pandemic because they didn't have to go to a factory. They could sit in their homes and very well create that craft because it comes from a natural source very close to their home. A weaver is close by. A dyer lives in the dyeing community lives in the village right next door, or in the house next door. They don't have to travel. They don't have to be in a big environment to get work done. They were working from home, and that's the beauty that I think pandemic has allowed us to understand how art handicrafts in India were created. So I think we have been able to focus on that a little bit.
That's incredibly interesting, and I'm going to pick up a little bit about you talking about your children and the next generation. Divya, what would keep you awake at night as you start to think about the next generation, and what would you really like your own legacy to be?
I think what scares me is that we are in a point, living in a moment where we need to wake up to a satisfaction. So this is not mindless consumption, it is conscious consumption. And it would scare me tremendously if the next generation doesn't understand that, like intrinsically, and just sort of start living every day naturally mindful of consumption patterns. So I think that for me is the primary fear that I have. And I feel identity, something that I've worked with always, to for each one of us to be global, but to be different and to celebrate our differences and our uniqueness. That is something that I've worked with, and I hope that we can develop that in the coming generations. And of course, mindfulness. So I think, yeah, those are the two things that I would really be afraid of and hope that we can. And I feel that we're heading that way. I feel we're being forced, really, whether you want to or not, we're being forced to look at these things. They're staring at us, So yes, that is my worst nightmare, but I'm also an optimist. And I feel that hopefully we're going to tide that, and we're going to create a much more conscious way of living and consuming all of it.
Overall. Well, that's what we'll hold on to that optimism.
Yeah, I also hope for one more thing, where I've been really listening carefully to Lavanya and Aston, of course, to all of us, but I really value what we're saying in terms of corporates looking at the bottom line. And really, I feel that if we began to understand that well-being and feeling good and making the entire value chain, as someone put it, also benefit is going to, in the long run, be the most profitable way to function on the planet. And I hope that we can make that happen. I'll start making small steps to make it happen. And Lavanya, maybe you're sitting at a wonderful place to illustrate great wealth out of great consciousness. And I think that would be amazing, because everyone's going to pick and learn by example. You need a couple of big successes and people are going to embrace it. And it'll not just be like one little movement somewhere. It'll actually become a way of life.
That would be an incredible achievement, wouldn't it? It would be an amazing story. And maybe it's going to come out of this conversation today. Sil, let me turn to you. Tell me a little bit about how you would like to support the future generation, and what worries you about the future and what inspires you about it.
Well, first of all, for me, like I said, when I started this conversation in the very beginning, this has been part of who I am. It's like I said, it's an inherent part of my being. And therefore, for me, it's my responsibility and throughout my entire life to build a legacy and create social impact. I have had that tagline since I can remember. And by building a legacy means that absolutely every single initiative, project, business that I lead, entrepreneur that I coach, designer that I mentor has to be about creating that sense of responsibility and enabling them, educating them, and giving them the tools that they need to think that way. And therefore, that is a lot to do why I built the business of Turban Thinker, my talk show, because it was my way of bridging the gap between this young generation and explaining to them that not everything is through your touchpad, not everything is a scroll. Everything is about humanity and impact and making a difference. So really, for me, it's ensuring that my 30 years of learning and how I was raised, the ethics and values of who I am, come out in every way possible and touch as many people's lives. And that's my endeavor, constantly. And that legacy can only be left through the future generation, which is why I spend all of my time, literally all of my time across all of my businesses, fostering and mentoring the potential of these young generations, because it's only through that. I mean, I take them on tours to India. I take them to the artisans, all these incredible talents. I show them how it takes 30,000 hours to create a piece, 200 hours. So every time they make that difference in their fancy studio in London, Paris, or New York, that they are impacting a huge amount of work. And so part of what we do is educate them to understand the value of people and culture. And as a matter of fact, hope for humanity is something that I stand for. And so that's my legacy, that, you know, I see that change happening. And through platforms like today is that increased voice, you know, and that's what I hope to do, is champion that voice and continue that path to educate, as my father did. May he rest in peace.
I'm sure we would all be extremely confident, Asil, that you're going to do great things in continuing your father's work. Absolutely.
God willing. Thank you so much.
I'm going to prompt you about the 5-7 minutes that we have now.
Okay, well, let's just, I know there are lots of questions, so maybe if I just turn to Lavanya to close and ask you, Lavanya, the very same question about what you would like your legacy to be for the future, and what scares you at the moment.
Okay. So I hope I have a ways to go before my legacy, but I'll tell you what worries and what inspires me. What does worry me about the younger generation and the people that are coming up now, and many of whom I work with because they're in their early 20s. They grew up in a very different India. Fast fashion is, for many of them, the only fashion that they've known. They've grown up in in an economy of abundance. They don't remember or have any kind of memories of the sort of scarcity that India was in the 80s and like prior to the early 90s. And so because of that, I think there's this illusion of, everything is sort of free and everything is abundant, because you're so far removed from the waste that it creates and how unsustainable it is at a planetary level. But what inspires me is, I think at the same time, there's a greater sort of social awareness because of technology and the internet and knowledge and the kind of talks that we're having today. Previously, this would have been a closed group, and it would have been almost an echo chamber of people speaking to each other. But now anyone from anywhere across the world can log in, understand, push their own self-awareness, and then you can radiate that knowledge in whatever space you are, right? As a parent or as a small business owner, as an artisan, whatever it is. So I think that social awareness has gone up. In general, there's more optimism, I think, from the kids that we're seeing now who are moving into the workspace. And I think behaviors as well, not a certain social citizenship. And I just pick one maybe controversial thing, but like littering. If you just take a silly thing like littering, you might find today in India, sometimes maybe the older generation doing it. You'd be hard pressed to find someone from the younger generation doing it. So these are all, I think good markers to see. The last point that I would make is, I think that what can we do, right, when it comes to conscious fashion, to just really take this out there and to be open? As much as possible, I try to bring my knowledge and educate everybody that I work with at every level, whether it's the marketing, the agencies that I work with, whether it's my own people who are in the ops who are handling the saris. And it's small stuff, but it's true stuff. Visibility and transparency doesn't have to be this massive corporate initiative. It's as simple as I tell them, hey, do you know every sari, it has maybe around 5,000 threads in it. And this is something that one of our designers who worked with us, he spoke about it so passionately. And then we sort of and we tell that story through the company. Every sari has maybe around 5,000 threads. Every single one of that thread has been touched by a hand. It's not something that comes off of the loom. It's not something that just runs off of machinery. When it's hand loom, every single one of those threads, you lift it, you move the shuttle. And so when you think about that, automatically you gain a certain respect for the product that you're holding, because you recognize the amount of labor and thoughtfulness that's gone into that product. And I think through stories as well, not just through larger structured formal ways of transparency. I think there's a lot of ways through which information can force that change by just making people more aware of their consumption and more aware of the impact and the consequences of their consumption behavior.
Lavanya, thank you very much. That's enormously helpful. And I think with you ladies, at the helm, conscious fashion really is going to make its mark now. Lubaina and Malu, maybe I can hand back to you now if you have some further questions. Thank you very much.
Silvia, I have a question for you. So it's from a consumer perspective. Sorry, Asil, I'm using that word again. But as a consumer, how do you envisage the future of UK fashion retail industry in terms of sustainability? And is there a lesson that can be learned by the rest of the nations?
Well, yeah, as a loyalist,
yes.
as a brand loyalist, I'm going to remember that for myself. It is very interesting. We've had a huge story this week in the press about Boohoo, which is an online retailer, and it's been a hugely successful retailer, and bigger now than a lot of the old sort of brands like Marks and Spencer. And there's been a huge challenge to it and a question put over whether it can even remain in the fashion business, because there were all sorts of discoveries about bad working practices at one of their distributors. I think that's a really interesting moment in time, because that's made the mainstream news. This isn't a fashion story, it's the mainstream news. And I think the other thing that's really interesting and that sort of we're seeing as a trend over here is digital, and the ability, as we look at sort of new augmented reality and so forth, there are going to be such new ways of consuming, you know, and the pandemic has a lot to do with this, because we haven't gone into shops. And so if we're going to consume on digital, we're going to use augmented reality to look at what we buy. I think that creates huge opportunity for artisans and people with skills and crafts. And this goes back to the point that Lavanya made as well about the future of corporations and the fact that the consumer can interact directly now with the producer. And I think that creates huge opportunities. So I think it's a challenging time. And this goes to Asil's very crucial points about how far we are from actually being successful. But it's also a hugely exciting opportunity. And the work that everybody is doing to promote the artisan, I think, is crucial. And actually that journey that the artisan has to become noticed and be made aware of to the corporations is going to be critical in all this. So that's my UK perspective.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Jayashree Ravi for the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you all for making this evening a memorable one. I thank the Mumbai chapter for this collaborative effort. And fashion footprint is that leaking tap that can turn into a flood if left unchecked. And I sincerely thank all the stalwarts for educating us on hazards of splurging on such indulgements. It was an honor to have as a panelist Her Royal Highness Radhika Rajivji. In spite of being a scion of Indian royalty, you have gone out of your way to nurture so many incarnations of Indian art and tradition. There was the legacy of wardrobe, and yet we patronized our artisans. So well said. And every handmade product is bespoke. How very true. And I can proudly say that in the South, our Kanjivaram saris are generally passed on to the daughters and even granddaughters. And I think that's unique to Indian culture, and we should all be proud of that. Thank you, Divya, for sharing your journey. You painted a picturesque word picture on how to create beauty without fumes and smoke, conscious creation. I also thank Asil Athar for introducing us to the behind the scenes of topmost iconic fashion brands in the world. And you spoke about returns and the issues of landfills. I'm sure a lot of us will be thinking about it now. And you're a true symbol of girl power. And I hope you continue to ream the retail world. Respect for humanity and environment and a 360-degree mindset is what we need, as you say. I must thank Flo for this opportunity. I'm so happy to have you among us, Lavanya. I feel so proud to say that Lavanya is my niece. So thank you, Lavanya. High quality, timeless design, profit negative, people positive. Yeah, this is very true, particularly when it comes to Kanjeevaram. And it's been so wonderful to see you growing over the years. And I pray your journey touches several milestones and you continue to inspire a lot of women to take over their family business and make it global. And it's definitely daunting to pose questions to a powerhouse of women. I sincerely thank Silvia because you did a brilliant job and you did it with a lot of grace. Thank you again for keeping the conversation lively with these wonderful women. We'll definitely remember all that you have said and promise not to be vain for woe. I thank all the members of the press and GB members, past chairs, past presidents, members of Mumbai and Chennai chapters, and all other chapters for your participation and support. It's been a wonderful evening. I'm sure everyone enjoyed. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was a lovely
Thank
evening
you
and
so much. Thanks, Malu.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Sabina.
Wonderful
Thanks.
group of women. And men. I'm not so sure. I'm sure there's some men there.
I agree.
Forget the men.
Yes,
Must never
Thank you so
forget the
much.
men.
I agree.
Malu, can we have the panelists and Silvia and all of us here for a bit of a photograph?
Sure.
Yeah. So
How do you do that?
once everybody leaves, we'll get a photograph. But everyone leaves. So it's later.
Okay.
That's
This is the
Lubena,
first time I've done a virtual photograph.
that's 60 to go, Lubena.
Yeah.
Well, if everyone put their videos on, we might do a group photo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could actually do that too. Can everyone put their videos on so I can take a group photograph right now?
Would you be able to? I
Yes.
think there's a.
There you go.
There we go.
There we are. Everyone's videos on, please.
Yeah.
Lovely.
That's nice.
Okay. Sonia, Rupali, everyone. Okay, I'm going to count to 3 and everybody say cheese. 1, 2, and 3.
Please.
All right. I'm done.
Brilliant.
The post panel session is much more interesting too. The fun part comes out. The
Yes.
pressure's gone, and then people are at their best. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Fabulous session,
So
really.
much.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was a very
Bye.
interesting
Thank you,
discussion.
Sylvia. Thank you,
Very
everyone.
nice.
Lovely
Thanks.
to meet you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye. See you.